Hi, friends. Welcome back. Thank you for stopping by. And if you're new here, welcome. Thank you. I've been talking a lot about marriage and specifically the authority structures within a marriage. And today's video is going to be kind of a really practical application of these principles. So I think one problem that I see, or like one problem that a lot of people have, is like, okay, we get it. Like, my husband's supposed to be the head of the household, but like literally, what does that mean? Because it's like, yeah, what does that mean? Because it's a little wishy-washy, right? Like in your mind, because like, how does that actually play out? Because in a family, for the most part, women make the bulk of the decisions in the household. The husband might decide where they live. He might decide what job he has. That she might sacrifice for that. But when it comes right down to it, the wife is generally making a huge amount of decisions, especially if she's a mom and she's taking care of small children. Like, most women are deciding like who the pediatrician is, what kind of clothes their kids wear, what sort of activities they do, and all this stuff, right? So it feels often that the woman is actually the one that's managing 99% of the household. Okay. Because of this, I think it's like really easy for women to become very domineering in their households because they're under a fair amount of pressure. And they tend to be doing a lot of work, and they're sort of in this management position in the household. And they unless they have like amazing coping mechanisms or amazing ability to regulate their emotions, like things can get really stressful, and she can have a lot of anxiety. So I think what I'm about to say might help people in this situation. And I think if you talk to your husband about this, I think he's going to be super game. And I think it's going to be like really, really helpful for your marriage. And this is the idea of rightly ordering your household. And honestly, this applies to anybody, but I'm going to use it from a Catholic standpoint, but this applies to every marriage, every family. It's just that the way that a Catholic household is going to order themselves is going to be determined by the church and our belief system. So we all know that in a marriage, like in a Christian marriage, that God is the center of your marriage, and then the husband and the wife, or the husband, like in the authority structure, God is the head of the household, then the father, then the mother. And but when we talk about rightly ordering a household, we're talking about the priorities. So you would call this like the priority structure of your household. And a lot of virtues are going to play into this. There's going to be humility, temperance, obedience, fortitude, all of these principles. And also, sorry, let me change this. The virtue of orderliness. There's a lot of virtues that are going to play into this. Okay. So when we talk about the order of importance within a household, or like who we put first in a Christian household, we put God first. And then we put the husband and the wife first. So your marriage goes first, and then the children are next, and then anybody else outside of the marriage. And for most people, I would think that they would say, their parents come next, or their siblings or family members or whatever. And then your community is after that. Okay. Now, because in a Catholic household, we put God first, every decision that is made within a Catholic household needs to be for the greater glory of God. So pretty much anything you decide to do as a husband or a wife needs to be for the glory of God. Okay, I think everybody kind of understands that, but sometimes we can get a little lost in this. Okay. And then after that, we have to consider our marriage and what are the things that are going to kind of hold our marriage together. So there could be a million things that each one of you wants in your marriage that would make you feel loved and cared for and whatever. But you got to kind of sort that out. Like, I'm a huge believer in like literally talking about this. There's a lot of people out there that believe in like in a household where everybody loves each other, that there's going to be that like a wife who loves her husband is automatically going to put his needs first, and that a husband who loves his wife will automatically put her needs first. But if the needs are not clearly laid out, like there can be a lot of room for mistakes with that. So don't just rely on like somebody's love for you to drive this. Okay. And then after that, you have your children, and how are you going to care for the children? How are you going to take care of their Catholic education because you're putting God first, right? How are you going to take care of their needs, their basic human needs? How are you going to take care of their educational needs? And hopefully all of those things will also reflect their love of God and bring them closer to God. All right. And all of the needs of the wife and the husband will bring you closer to God. Then in your community, it's the same thing. So are the people in your community or your family life, are they supporting you in your journey towards God? Or are they pulling you away from it? Are they supporting you first and foremost in your family or your marriage? Are they supporting you then with your children? So, every decision in the household is going to need to be made with this principle in mind. But the problem is you really need to sit down and actually discuss what these principles are. And this is where I'm going to say to women, this is your husband's wheelhouse. All right, this is a man's wheelhouse. And the reason I'm saying that is because I believe, and from what I've observed, men are much more apt to operate through life by a set of principles than women. And if you think about any organization that is male dominated, from the best organizations like the Catholic Church to the worst organizations like the mafia, those organizations are run on a set of principles. And those principles are based on an honor system. And they could be good or they could be bad. All right. And honestly, there's been a lot of shenanigans in the Catholic Church too. I'm not saying that like all those men are operating in like full capacity on their like honor system, but men like to organize themselves based on a system of principles. They do not generally organize themselves based on a system of feelings or emotions. Okay. Women, for the most part, and I'm not talking about all women or whatever, but this is just my observation. Women are very much led in a system where they work together as women based on their emotional needs. Anybody who's ever been involved in a women's club or a mom's group knows that the operating principles matter a lot less than the group dynamics as far as friendships are concerned. Okay. So, this is where, as a Catholic wife who earnestly wants to have like a proper ordering of her household, or where a Catholic husband who earnestly wants to have a proper ordering of his household is going to, this is where you guys are going to be able to achieve that. And you're going to have a lot more peace and harmony in your household, hopefully. Okay. So what I suggest, and I've talked to several people about this. I've talked to a bunch of my super Catholic friends. I've talked to a Catholic like psychologist. I've talked to a bunch of people about this in the last couple of days, and everybody is sort of agrees that this is extremely important. What you and your husband, or you and your wife, and honestly, even if you're single, you're going to sit down and do this anyway too, because you need to operate your own life based on a set of principles. All right. You're going to sit down and write down exactly what your principles are. Okay. So this could look like, and I mean exactly what your principles are. And I'm nitty gritty, right down to the very, like, I want every detail of your life written out. Okay. So what this looks like is, if you're a Catholic family, I'm just going to throw this out there as an example. Okay. The first thing, God. How do you support God in your marriage? Well, you guys can pray together. Or individually. We'll say first individually. How do we individually support, like how do you individually, separately from each other, develop your spiritual life? That could look like frequent reception of the sacraments, prayer life, Bible study. You know what I mean, right? Okay. And then as a couple, how are you guys going to support each other in your spiritual life? That means, if your husband goes to mass at 6:00 in the morning, like the wife is going to get up and deal with the kids so her husband can go have time to pray. And then he's going to do the same thing for her later in the day. If she needs to go to mass or if she needs to go to confession, like the husband is going to, he's going to support her in that. If it's a reasonable arrangement. Okay. We'll get into that in just a little bit. And the same thing with the children. How are you going to support your children in their Catholic education? How are you going to teach them your Catholic world, right? And then how are you going to govern yourself in order to show your children how to be a good Catholic? So you got to start thinking about the modeling. Like good Catholics do not gossip about each other. You can't gossip in front of your kids. Shouldn't be gossiping anyway, but you shouldn't do it in front of your kids. Good Catholics are charitable towards each other. Like you don't yell at people in traffic in front of your children. That teaches them bad. Like you're going to discipline your kids according to charity. You're going to teach them all of that kind of stuff, okay? And then everybody else in your world, like, how are you going to spread the faith to those people? How are you going to stand up in your community? How are you going to support your church? What are you going to do? Okay. All right. Now, here's where things get kind of fun, I think. I don't know. Anyway, it's kind of interesting. So then you're going to go back and you're going to talk about your marriage. So we got the spiritual stuff worked out a little bit, okay? Everything is reflective of God. Like, you're always going back to God. Is this in God's will? Is this not God's will? Is this God's will? Is this not God's will? Then you're going to go back to your marriage and you're each going to say exactly what it is that your goals are for your marriage. Hopefully that means like you're going to be happily married until the day you die. But then you're going to write down the things that make you happy in your marriage. Okay? You're going to write this stuff down. And then you're going to look at the holes in your daily schedule that are not allowing you, or the holes in your communication that are not allowing for the ways that you feel love to come out. All right. So what that might look like, let's say your husband wants to have more intimacy with you. Then you're going to sit down as a good wife, a humble wife who truly wants to love her husband fully and be there for him emotionally and to express herself to him physically. You're going to figure out how you're going to make that happen. And what I mean by this is you're going to be like, okay, for instance, super common. A lot of people struggle with this. Let's say mom goes and puts the kids to bed and then she falls asleep in the bed and then she's crawling. She forgets to like come to bed with her own husband. She gets in there at like 1:00 in the morning. This is super common. Anybody, like I heard written somewhere that like anybody over the age of 25 will, like the rule is if you lay down with a kid after 8:00, you're going to fall asleep with them. Okay. So that could look like, all right, I'm going to read to the kid on the couch and then put them in their room. And if they need me to stay with them until they fall asleep, I'm not going to get into bed and lay down and cuddle with them. I'm just going to pat them on the back until they fall asleep. All right. Or it could involve, I'm going to teach my kid to fall asleep on their own or whatever. You got to figure this out. Okay. That's on you. But the point is you need to look at what it is that might be pulling you back from intimacy, and you're going to work that out. You're going to actually figure out, why is this not happening? Because a lot of times things like that get blocked by prioritizing something that is not your marriage. Okay. So I'm going to be totally honest. Like sometimes I'll like get caught up talking to a friend on the phone instead of like carving out time to be with my husband, and instead of talking to him at the end of the evening after our kids go to sleep, like sometimes I get caught up with one of my friends. It's a problem. And that absolutely you should never prioritize friendships outside of your marriage over your husband. And I'm not talking about guy friends. I'm talking about my girlfriends, like female friends. But like sometimes I'll have a boundary issue with that. Okay. So your husband comes first. That's all I'm saying. Your wife comes first. So if your wife says, hey, if the wife in the family is like, the way that I'm going to feel loved is if, we get to have a date night once a month, and then both of you need to figure out how to make that happen. Okay. I hope this is clear. All right. But you're going to have to write all of these things down. So when it comes to, and honestly, I'm going to just really quickly, like, this also means that your spiritual life, yes, you should put God first. You can put God first through loving your husband though. If your spiritual life revolves around church and that is away from your husband, if you're getting really caught up in your church work and you're doing a ton of work outside of your family for the church, your family comes first, okay? You can put God first by putting your family first. That is the teaching of the church. We do not put God first by giving our time and attention to the church structure outside of your marriage, if that makes sense. So if your husband, for instance, or if your wife wants more quality time with you, you should not be putting that extra energy towards your church community. You should be putting energy into your marriage, but you can still be praying. You can be offering up everything to God by loving your wife and being more present. Okay. So it's the same thing with your children. So everything when it comes to caring for your children, every decision you make with regards to your children needs to reflect the higher principles that you have. So first, that would be, their Catholic faith. Second, that might be their education. Like, how are your children going to do in the world of education? Like, how are you going to support their education? What are you going to do? Okay. Sorry. So, I had to pause for a second. With your children, so let's say after faith, education is next. Okay. So how are you supporting their education? What are you going to do to support their education? what are the guiding principles for their education? Are you going to sit down and read to your children every night? Are you going to like what is driving this? And if the goal of your children is for their education, is their education invading your marriage in a way that might be damaging? What this could possibly look like is, are you a mom who is really into homeschooling, but like it has actually like completely sucked every bit of energy out of you and you don't have any time for your husband? Okay, your priorities are upside down right there. Okay. Homeschooling's great. I don't have a problem with homeschooling. But if homeschooling is taking precedence over intimacy in your marriage or spending time with your husband, or if you're too stressed out to, make time for that, you're putting your children before your marriage, if this makes sense. Okay. So that could be a conflict. I'm just kind of like grabbing things like I'm not saying anything about homeschooling in a general way. I'm just saying that could be a problem for you. Okay. So with children too, after their education, what about extracurricular activities? Are you intentional about your after school activities? Like as a family, are your after school activities taking up more time than they should? Are they taking up time away from mass? Because if the first thing that you need to do as a family is go to church together on a Sunday. Are you allowing things like soccer tournaments for little Johnny, who's 8 years old and shows literally no talent in sports whatsoever? Is that dominating your Sundays? Is that helping your family life? Is that supporting their faith journey? Is that supporting their education? Are your children, or are you picking activities that you feel teach your children these guiding principles for life? So are you picking activities that you think will help them for the rest of their lives? What is the driving principle behind the activities? Like I can tell you in my own family, our children, there are some activities that like my kids will do, sports they will do. Swimming, it's a life skill. Activities, piano, I need them to be literate in music. Like this is like very important to me. And to my husband, we're both musicians. Like this is super important to us. But like for me, it's also like kind of random stuff. Like I think boys in America should play baseball because it's our sport. Like I'm like, you're an American, you need to play baseball. Maybe that's because I'm from an immigrant family. Like, I don't know, but I'm like, that's an American sport. You're playing baseball. Like, I don't know. It's just like, but there's a principle behind it, right? So there's a reason that I'm prioritizing that, or that my husband is prioritizing these things. And so it's all kind of intertwined in a way that makes sense to us as a family, but supports our principles as a family. Okay. So then the next one would be friends and family outside of your family. And like, how many hours a week are you going to devote to these people? How much energy are you going to devote to them? Is your friendship with people in your marriage in any way harming, or outside of your marriage in any way harming your marriage? Are you giving too much attention to one of your friends? Even if this is totally platonic, like I'm not talking about emotional affairs or anything like that. That's like a whole different thing that we could talk about. But I mean, like, literally, do you have like a good friend that dominates your life? A lot of people have this. Do you have, like, if you're the husband of a family, are you spending an inordinate amount of time with your guy friends instead of being home with your wife? And if you are spending too much time with your guy friends, why? Is it because you're not happy at home? So this would come up in this conversation we're talking about. And honestly, you're going to have to, like, for men and for women, these are things that we need to talk about. We have to be grown-ups about this, okay? And this is why I'm saying this is like a guiding principle thing, because you're not accusing each other of wounding you. What you're saying, if you have a guiding principle for life, if you have a rightly ordered home, is that every decision needs to support what you have decided together is important to you guys as far as like your life as a couple and what you're doing. All organizations are based on guiding principles. All good organizations have a mission statement. And your marriage should be no different. Okay. So I'm just like making this video super quick. I got to run. But this is just kind of like to get the ball rolling on this conversation. I'm going to circle back and talk about this in greater detail. But yeah. And like, I think it's like right down to kind of like, okay, so if the guiding principle of your marriage though, like real quick before I go, if the guiding principle of your marriage is, all right, I want to have a happy, loving marriage until the day I die. I want to be, I want us to be close and kind to each other. Then if, I don't know, your husband doesn't load the dishwasher correctly, you're not going to yell at him about it. Because first of all, let's say, you're life is geared towards Christ. Good Christian women don't yell at people. Good Christian men don't either. But like, that's not how we deal with each other. Jesus doesn't want us to do, we know Jesus doesn't want us to do this. He doesn't want you to yell at your husband about the dishes. Also, that's not loving. It's not going to get you any closer to your husband. So then every decision you make with regards to your husband, because, you know, and obviously everybody says they want to have a loving marriage. So you're going to have to be a little bit more specific than that. But I'm just using this as a very general thing. Every decision needs to reflect that. So if it's like, if I want to have a happy, loving marriage with my husband and he's in a bad mood or something like that, if he's being a crabby pants, is that word crabby pants again? I'm sorry, I used that before, but if he's being a crabby pants, like what can I do as a wife based on my guiding principles to help him come out of his moodiness in that moment? Like, what can I do to help make him feel better? Could I give him a back rub? Could I, you know, be a little flirty, if you know what I mean? There are probably children watching this, but could I be a little flirty with him and like promise maybe that something nice might happen, you know, because he's grumpy? Or could I make him, you know, a beer, or could I hand him a beer, or like give him a drink, or I don't know. Just what can you do as a wife in those moments, guided by your guiding principles? Because the problem is, if you go based on, as a woman, if you try to base everything you're doing based on how you feel about it and your emotional drive, you're going to be just constantly putting out emotional fires all day. Because as a woman, you're very sensitive to your environment. Like, people are going to annoy you. Your husband's going to annoy you. Your kids are going to annoy you. And if you don't have a guiding principle behind every decision you make, you're probably going to make a lot of really bad decisions. You're going to be shooting from the hip. It's not good. Okay. And your husband, it's the same thing. But the thing is with men, honestly, is that men naturally are driven by principle. They really are. And I know that might sound terribly sexist, but like, I'm kind of like, it's really kind of true. Okay. Men are highly organized in a very systematic way. They are highly hierarchical within their structure. And this plays out in the animal kingdom and stuff like this too. Like, men are very, very, very into hierarchy. Women are more into relationships that are like kind of flowy. Okay. We don't have these strict hierarchies. We really don't. And so, I mean, we kind of do, I guess, a little bit, but not really. Like, most women are kind of operating on the same plane with one another, and like just sort of, they're sort of like glued together based on their emotional involvement with each other. So when you're married as a woman, the way you're going to get your husband to lead your family, the way that you're going to kind of like hand this over to him, is to allow him to be the guiding principle of the family. And I think if you bring this up with your husband, he's going to be like, this is awesome. I love this. Okay, let's sit down and talk about it. Okay. Anyway, talk to you guys soon. Bye.